And, it's always hard to follow a vet. So I'm going to say up front a couple things. Number one, if you're fleeing the room because you think this is a media training session, it's not, don't worry. And two, unlike a vet, my presentations aren't going to make you laugh every few minutes. In fact, I'm usually scheduled near the end of the day because when I'm done telling people what we see and what's going on, they usually want to go to the bar. I don't get a cut, although I've been thinking that would be probably a good thing for me to start doing. As mentioned, my agency, we have over 25 full-time topic and region-dedicated analysts. We track all issues in food, agriculture, consumer intersections. We follow all of the advocacy groups and stakeholders. We do in-depth research on them. And we try to make connections between how does all this information out there and how the media engages and reports on it actually influence public attitudes and consumer behaviors. And does this work? Here's another one. Number one, okay. And so what I'm going to share with you first is what is the environment that we're dealing with today. In fact, we are currently challenged in food and ag with the most intense period of advocacy that we've seen in over 20 years. This was started with a campaign that was actually launched around 2008, 2009. We started seeing it coming then. It formally came out in 2012 with the 50th anniversary of Rachel Carlson's Silent Spring. And we're right in the middle right now of a multi-year effort focusing in on food production related issues, food safety. It involves GMOs, antibiotics, pesticides, but they're integrated with much broader themes. And what we're seeing that's somewhat unique is the new advocacy models of partnering with both commercial and political influencers. A little bit here of what that looks like in terms of media coverage and content out there. Between 2012 when this started and today, we've seen 1,000% increase in what we would say volume of, and this is just global crop protection and biotech news trends. The blue line on the bottom is pesticide-related issues, the green line is crop protection, and the red line is where they're conflating them together. For a long time, people were defending GMOs separately from pesticides. You can't do that anymore. So, by the way, if you're in the GMO business, you're in the pesticide business. And the activists and the media have conflated these two issues very effectively. When we look at other issues such as animal health and productivity, similarly, the campaign here really kicked into gear around the end of 2013 into 2014. And since 2014, it's been pretty steady. That's not a dip in there. That's just a date change. In terms of we track animal health and productivity issues, this is not animal welfare. This is just the health and productivity input issues. And you can see that it's 75% driven by the antibiotic issue. In 2012, it was less than 20% driven by antibiotics. So antibiotics have driven the news and information about this out there. Finally, a new and emerging element, and this is going to be the intersection point. If you're not already on top of this, you may be a little late to the game. But water. Just in the past year, since we started tracking these issues, we've seen a 110% increase in conversations, reporting about water issues. Algae blooms, dead zones, the WOTUS litigation, and things like that obviously took off earlier this year. Pesticides. Just as a test case, if you're not watching the Des Moines Water Works lawsuit, start paying attention. This is an issue where they're very smartly going at, they being advocacy groups and interests who are opposed to conventional production agriculture, are actually going after the physical act of farming. They're not specifically targeting GMOs. They're not specifically targeting animal agriculture and CAFOs, although we're seeing that all being conflated in this. They're going after just the act of high production agriculture, claiming that that in and of itself is creating water quality problems with severe health risks for humans. And water is going to be where we're going to see all of our issues, be it antibiotic, be it fertilizer, be it GMOs or pesticides, coming together in the coming years. And what are the sources of this? Because you have to realize if you're dealing with the media, you're dealing with people who are out there competing for space and for telling stories. I always, when we used to do media trainings, I'd ask people, why do you watch the evening news? And people would raise their hands and say, well, to be informed, and I'd shake my head. And someone else would, to stay up on top of X, Y, or Z, or to follow this, and I'd shake my head until someone would ask the question, well, why do you watch the evening news? And I'd say, because I want to see who won. Very few stories appear without somebody behind them trying to promote them. And the people promoting the stories around food and ag production issues today fall into three categories: power, profits, or politics. Power. NGOs, they're seeking influence. Most of them actually don't care about environmental issues, food safety, whatever. They're very hardcore political interests behind the scenes. People here are probably familiar with Andy Kimbrell, I'm guessing, the head of the Center for Food Safety. He's probably one of the most influential people in the anti-GMO movement out there today. But he represents an industry. The protest industry is a big industry, and anti-ag NGOs annual budgets globally this year, or actually last year, this is when we're evaluating that, will exceed $10 billion. That's a B. Okay, this is money being spent to influence public attitudes about what you do and sell. Okay, this is not, and they don't have an R&D department. They don't actually have a production department where they have to make stuff. They're not regulated, so they're not spending money on, producing reports and defending what they do. This is all advocacy, propaganda, and marketing. And it's targeting you here in this room. Second, profits. I shouldn't say I hate seeing this sort of stuff out in the stores, but the organic and natural products industry, and this is the marketing side, folks. I'm not talking about producers, I'm not talking about consumers, but the people who market these products out there, and they are the leading source of money to the activists like Andy Kimbrell, by the way. They too are spending billions of dollars on absence claim marketing, on disparagement, on creating fears about pesticide use, GMOs, animal health and productivity tools. It's $100 billion, certified organic alone is a $100 billion industry in 2015. When you combine this with all the natural product, alternative health, and promotion folks who also carry these messages, it's categorized as a group called LOHAS, Life of Health and Alternative Sustainability. Combined in the U.S. alone, it's a $300 billion industry. People think of the Joe Mercolas of the world, Yvette mentioned him, or natural news folks who are selling supplements. They think of them as fringe players. They're bigger than we are. So, everybody says, it's David versus Goliath, and the Davids are all these small organic and natural producers. The organic industry is 3 times bigger than the biotech seed industry, globally. 3 times bigger. Okay, it's not David versus Goliath. You might argue it's Goliath versus Goliath here. And politics. We are seeing political influences around the world, be it China, Russia, on a geopolitical level, and at a local level, we're seeing political parties. Even here in the U.S., we see this played out with some of the different segments of Green Party or Natural Law Party folks who use food as a weapon. They use food as a weapon to create instability around the world in various places. They don't care that it's not a food issue for them, it's a political issue. These are the 3 big influences that we see driving those news trends. And what are they doing? So why do we decide to do this and engage in the context of this? It's somewhat scary. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how do you rationalize and determine the return on investment? How do you define what is media today? It's unclear. Bloggers, Dr. Oz, the New York Times. When do you decide to engage, and how? What do you need to do to engage more effectively? Well, first is to understand how storytelling takes place today in the media. People are motivated highly by risks, and we see these messages around risk issues in 3 core areas: health and safety, environmental risks, and socioeconomic impact, choice and control issues. Things like GMOs cause cancer, antibiotic superbugs, superweeds, the right to know. And these are wrapped into stories that have common allegories of villains, victims, and heroes, all with a sense of urgency. We need to act and do something right away. Urgency, we see A World Without Bees, came out just a couple years ago in Time cover, a 400% increase in allergies, chemicals sprayed on GMO crops in our drinking water. These chemicals are causing autism, and superbugs are going to kill 10 million people by 2050. When you hear information like this, it starts to trigger in you a need to do something about it. So when you're, driving along, the average person, by the way, is hit with 1,200 to 1,400 pieces of information a day. Which ones do we remember? Do we remember the positive story that we might have heard in that trade, publication or ag radio show about how antibiotics are effective and they're not bad? Or do we remember the story about how there's going to be 50 million people who will die because of antibiotic use in animal agriculture, and my kid might be one of them? I'm pretty sure which story I'm going to remember. I mean, so when I look back at like all those stories about animal health and productivity, if I broke them down into favorable versus negative, we actually have a fair number of favorable stories out there, but they're all in spaces and channels where we're talking to ourselves. We're not in the channels and spaces where a vet is talking or where people are listening, and they're all about positive things. People don't remember that. They remember the villains, the victims, the heroes, the risk and fear, and that's what actually triggers people to think about, should I do something about this? So when you're engaging in a story in the media, I want to know, do you know, are you the victim, are you the villain or the hero? And I'll tell you, if you don't know, you're the villain. We are, our industry, the people working it, we're almost always cast as the villain in these scenarios. And so we need to flip that around. We need to recast the stories that we tell in alternative ways. And we also need to think about, well, how does this work in process? People come to form committed beliefs. I am going to start buying antibiotic-free chicken. Why did they get there at Purdue? Why did this become something that we had to deal with? Well, there's a model. It's based on a fellow named Daniel Yankelovich who did a lot of socioeconomic research in the 60s and 70s, talked about here's all the steps that people take to form a committed belief. When I worked in politics, this is how we used to think about how do we get people to vote for us. And it's relatively simple. It starts with awareness. We become aware of something. We can become aware in social media. We can hear it on the radio. But what we learned about awareness is risk-based awareness, not opportunity or benefits-based awareness, is what triggers people to start the process of opinion formation. You hear something, you can be successful, do X, Y, or Z. If you act today, it sort of goes over us. Your kids will get cancer if you let them continue to drink apple juice. You go, okay, I might have to do something about that. So awareness, and if it's risk-based awareness, it starts to trigger what we call the opinion formation process. And the good news is today, the first place people go, they Google it. So it's called first inquiry. And we go to that first evaluation phase and they Google it. And unfortunately we know today, Google GMOs, Google antibiotics, as a vet, how do you do? And you're going to come up with a lot of reinforcing stuff to that risk-based awareness that you heard that reinforces your need to go and say, oh, I might have to do something about this. I might have to adopt a new behavior. I might have to start buying organic or changing the things that I bring into my household to protect my family. The next phase they go into is called choice work. And this is where we weigh pros and cons. This is where we'll go in and say, okay, I have to make a change. What are the benefits? What are the costs of doing this? Except for the research shows people don't weigh the pros. They only look for the cons. I use an example. I travel a lot. I don't eat terribly well, and my cholesterol goes up. So my doctor comes to me and says, Jay, I'm going to have to put you on a statin, and you're probably going to have to take it for the rest of your life, but it's so you won't die from a heart attack. But you're going to have to take a drug. You're going to have to change your behavior for the rest of your life. So what do? Well, I go and first thing I Google statin. It says a drug to treat cholesterol. And then what's the next thing I do? When I'm doing my choice work, do I Google benefits of statins, efficacy of statins? What do I look for? Side effects. This is the process we all engage in, and we do it and whether we do it that specifically, say, in the case I just mentioned, or if we're processing it either online or looking to pick up bits of information from people out there, we actually go out and we're listening and looking for the risks. And they need to be mitigated. And then finally, we go and we want to act. All right, I now know that I'm going to act on this, and let's say I'm following an activist message on antibiotics. Well, what can I do? Well, online, you go and you'll find so many opportunities that the activists and others and the marketers present to say, hey, you can check the box off. Sign up now and send your letter in to get, the FDA to ban antibiotic use in animal agriculture. Check the box today and commit that you'll buy only antibiotic-free organic meat, whatever it may be. What do we do on the industry side? We offer more education. There's very few engagement opportunities for us to give people. And so we need to start thinking about how can we offer those engagement opportunities to get people to buy in. But the other thing to think about, and this comes into play for our media engagement, for our other outreach, is if you'll notice between each one of these segments there's a little resistance bar. And this is actually a little bit of good news. People don't want to change behaviors. They don't want to have to go, all right, I've got to pay more and start buying that hormone-free, antibiotic-free chicken. They want to know that it's okay to keep doing what they've been doing. And so if at each one of those intersection points, at that first inquiry, social media where there's all the buzz, they go out and someone says, oh, GMOs are bad, but then they see a vet and they go, oh, wait a second, GMOs aren't bad, they're good. People go, oh, wait a second, this is not so urgent, it's a he said, she said kind of situation. I may not even bother going into first inquiry to check this out. But if they get to first inquiry and they're Googling these issues, if they see two sides, that sometimes is enough to also say, oh, wait a second, there's no antibiotics actually in any meat. These stories are being promoted by people who don't have credibility. Maybe I won't go any further, and they'll stop. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to support you, but they won't form that negative belief about you. And sometimes that's all we need. So at each one of those steps, we need to be aware of and be ready to present resistance and an alternative side and story. So why engage? We all already know news, media, and websites are the two top influencing sources for consumers when they form their belief about food. There's significant intersection opportunities to influence people, as we mentioned, at these intersection points there. But also, we do a lot of media training, and particularly like in the area of GMOs, and we've tried this for years to train people, how can you be a better biotech blogger? And it never worked. We started training people on how to be a better blogger to enhance and protect their own reputation. So talking to your people and communicating with them about taking ownership of their personal reputations online to promote their issues, to promote their science, to promote their industry, will in turn make them better bloggers for that topic area. So making sure people realize that your reputations as individuals is going to be highly defined online, particularly if you work in this industry and you're going to be the subject of a lot of attacks. I don't know if people here follow Twitter and all, but Yvette and I just, I think it was yesterday, because we were speaking here, Gary Ruskin of the U.S. Right to Know organization started attacking us, calling me a Monsanto flack. Full disclosure, I did work for Monsanto 17 years ago. I don't know how that, they're not a client, so I don't know how that makes me a Monsanto flack today, but if you go and defend your industry in conventional agriculture, you'll often be associated with Monsanto whether you never worked for them or not, like Yvette, just because they're a symbol. But you'll be attacked and you'll need to defend your own reputation. So the next thing is to understand what and who. I mean, today, sometimes an influential blogger who you don't know anything about could actually be a good source. But knowing the difference of whether it's, Dr. Oz or whomever, always ask first, who's calling? And then to understand the type of platform, because there's different tactics. And I'm not going to get into them today about how do you prepare to do print versus radio versus television. All I'm going to tell you is you have to prepare. All right? So if you're going in and thinking you can do a radio interview tomorrow and you haven't done one in 3 years, you're going to screw up. If you're going to do a long-form print interview, you need to know and you need to have professional support so they can tell you, look, this is how this format works. Here are the ground rules that you can engage in to prepare before you go in. And the way you prepare is research. You need to know who the people are, what they've written. It's always okay to ask questions of the journalists before you answer them. What's your deadline? What's your, who else have you talked to? They won't always tell you everything, but you need to gather more information before you start giving it. It's a negotiation. let people in your industry know, I've been approached and called by so-and-so. You'll be amazed. Oh, wait a second, I talked to them last week, or I had this experience with them in the past. Collecting that information is critical to being effective. And just remember, and there's a science journalist, her name is Brooke Burrell, she's very good, and she said this at a conference that I was at a few months ago. She goes, look, I'm not your friend, and it's not a journalist's job to write the story you want. Even if you think you're friends with a journalist, I've been working in media for over 30 years. I know a lot of reporters. We go out and we have drinks, and some of them are good friends of mine on some levels, but if they're coming to me professionally, that relationship has changed. And you need to realize that. And so if you think you're buddies with somebody and you can do an interview with them, just remember that they have a job to do too here, and it's not to help you do what you want to do. When do you say no? It's okay to say no. Dr. Oz was creating a lot of problems for us in our industries a few years ago, and we decided that people couldn't say no to a certain point to him, so we started a campaign around him and the GMO issues to help expose what he was doing after a certain interview with Martina McLaughlin and Alison Van Eenenum, who many of you guys know. You may have even seen the interview. Dr. Oz was a no-win situation, but he was going to keep going after us and attacking us. So we worked with the academics. We did the show, but we used their participation, in fact, to go off and attack Dr. Oz for what he was doing, and the fact that he was being sponsored and paid by the organic and natural products and alternative health industry to attack GMOs, that he was having discredited people on the show. So now it's okay for our people to say no to him because his credibility has been taken down a few notches. But you can always think about, do you have the time to prepare? Are you the right person to answer these questions? Just because someone's called you and wants to know about a specific topic that you intersect with doesn't mean you're the right expert, and you might want to help them find that right expert instead. Can you negotiate ground rules? Okay, most people they think they just have to accept whatever the reporter says. And next thing you know, they're setting up the interview with you in front of some sort of bizarre-looking slaughterhouse, and all the optics and everything are just going to be terrible. You can negotiate, and are you prepared? Never go in without some support and training ahead of time. You'll lose. I used to brief at the White House and the State Department. I've done 60 Minutes. I've done every single evening and morning news show there is to be done. If someone asked me to go and do a television interview tomorrow, I'd say absolutely no. Hell no. I haven't done one in a while, and I'm not prepared. You need to prepare because there's very specific skills for all these different types of interview settings that you need to have. And those skills include science, advocacy, communications. Some people know it as risk communications. And there's 4 elements to this, and this is my dangling a little bit of hope for you about some of the things to consider. We're often fighting and managing this by shouting science back at people, and it really doesn't work. We need to look at issues of trust, how people perceive risk, how mental noise affects people's ability to process information, and things that we call negative dominance. Trust. Trust is the most important thing that you need to establish when you're communicating about your issues. Will Rogers always used to say, people want to know that you care before they'll care what you know. And empathy or caring is responsible for 50% of whether or not people will trust you. Okay, so even though you may not agree with the premise even of a question, aren't you concerned that antibiotics, and their use in animal agriculture is going to cause all of our children to die from infections in 5 years? I mean, there's crazy stuff out there. In order to answer that question effectively and not just say absolutely not, because they're not going to hear you that way, you have to acknowledge where the concern comes from. People need to know, and this even includes journalists and how your story gets represented by them, that you care about these issues too. I care about these things, and I can understand why this would be of concern to you, because look, as a parent of 2 kids, I care about their health and safety immensely. So you need to open and start with that. And you always need to demonstrate honesty, you need to show your competence, and you need to show that you're dedicated and committed to ongoing improvement. It's a threshold item for communicating. And one of the ways that we gain credibility and trust is through third parties. Who else agrees with us in what we're talking about? You may know that you're an expert, but will your audiences interpret it that way? So when you're referencing facts, be it about GMOs or pesticides or antibiotics or the use of productivity hormones, you need to be able to say, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics. You know, by the way, they've said there is no issue with precocious puberty, and there's no direct pathways associated with the use of things like RBST, supplementation in cows, and these claims that kids are entering puberty at a younger age. So it's not just you saying it, you need to associate with people who have higher credibility with your audiences and to reinforce your messages and include them into your messages when preparing to talk to the media. Secondly, people's perceptions of risk are different than experts. It doesn't matter what the facts are, it's what their perception is. And the way to, I call it lowering the temperature. You need to lower the temperature, which has got that fear ginned up around risk, is by addressing these factors. And the first is step number one, trust. If they trust you, they're going to listen, and it's going to lower the temperature. But the next factors are, well, what consumer benefit can I convey? This is so hard in animal and production agriculture because most of the inputs that we use, we all know what the consumer benefits are in terms of abundant, affordable food, but it's not direct enough. And so this is one where I wouldn't try to stretch it to say, oh, GMOs, they enable us to give you, affordable, abundant food. People don't get that. It's not a direct enough benefit. But if you have a consumer benefit, use it. Because people will say, oh, I'm willing to accept a little bit of risk for some benefit. How many of us drive cars? Everybody, or at least everybody's been in one, right? There's a lot of people die every year in car accidents. We assume that risk because of the benefit. It's okay. Next, how much control do I have? This is where we get all wrapped up into this damn labeling debate. Sorry for the language. But it's frustrating. Because they say you don't have a choice. Well, actually, you have plenty of choices. You want to be GMO-free? Buy organic. It's an option for you. But we didn't handle that very well, quite frankly. But if you can convey to people that they do have choices, the risk will go down because they'll feel they have control. The research also shows they never invoke the control. Almost never. I mean, it's amazing. People will say anything in a poll, and you can focus group of consumers, and they'll say, yes, I want all these things. Then go and check that against the IRI data and see if they actually behave that way. The people at Walmart do a fabulous job on this, I found, by the way. And some of the presentations they give are really fascinating. And you talk to, like, the top meat buyer, the top dairy buyer for Walmart. He's like, my customers don't want that shit. I know my customers. We track them. We know that, they follow this pretty well. So understanding, giving people control or a sense of control is critical, and demonstrating what's fair. And that includes what's fair to producers. Why should producers be constrained or forced to use old technologies or engage in practices that they know are harmful to the welfare of their animals that they care about and are about the sustainability of what they do? So those four factors are key elements to include in your messaging that will help and work that story around so that you're no longer the villain perceived in this and turn it around. The third piece is mental noise. When we're experts, we want to run to the table with a journalist or at a presentation and say, oh, you've asked about antibiotics. Let me tell you the 4,000 things I know about this. And stack it all up. People have an ability to process 3 pieces of information, particularly when they're upset. And they'll remember things in 3s. You can always have backup stuff, but when you go into those interviews, and it's message discipline, you see this in politics all the time, staying on message. James Carville was great. It's the economy, stupid. No matter what question he was asked in one debate I saw with him and the guy from Ross Perot's camp at the time, he never said anything other than, it's the economy, stupid. What's your position on healthcare? It's the economy, stupid. It was pretty, so message discipline. Go in with 3 points that you need to make that are your best ones that address the issues and stick with them. You can always provide more information later. So limit it to 3, repeat. And as Yvette said, and this is tough for us, particularly those of you who are scientists in the room, when we share this, keep it at a 6th grade reading level. Think about USA Today. And I don't care if your audience is 6th graders or if your audience is the American Chemistry Society. when you're talking about high-risk issues, you need to keep it at a very clear and concise way when you're speaking with them. And also, it's the only way that it'll work when you're dealing with journalists. It's not that they're not smart enough. It's what they have to write is what you say, and if you don't say it in a clear way, it's going to be harder for them to write. Finally, when people are upset, negative information carries more weight. This is the challenge we have in the media. We call it false balance. All right, so they're going to say, I have to include both sides. And so they think the story is balanced, and everybody calls and they're pissed off at them because they've got an expert over here saying antibiotics aren't a problem, used in the following responsible manners in animal agriculture, and then you have whomever it may be, Joe Mercola or some other tinfoil hat guy that they've interviewed, regardless of their level of credibility. This is not all journalists, by the way, but it happens with a lot, just to say they've showed both sides. So at the end of the day, the journalist has his balance. The consumer reading the story, that negative carries 4 times the weight, basically, or 3 times the weight of the positive. And they're not going to let you have 3 people versus their 1. So we need to try to keep our content and information positive, avoid using negatives when we're engaged in activities because people hear them and if you can say, does your product cause cancer? My product does not cause cancer. What do they hear? They hear my product causes cancer. You need to be able to speak about things in effective manners that are like, here's what I can tell you about the safety of our products. Here's why our products are safe, reinforcing those types of messages. So just in summary, those are the 4 areas to remember: trust, risk, mental noise, and negative dominance. The key takeaway here is show you care before you show you what you know. That's going to matter a lot. Address those factors if you can. Trust, consumer benefits, control, and fairness. Keep it clear and concise, and avoid playing into the negatives out there. Just a couple other things and tips in terms of things to avoid, and I know this is going against what Yvette said a little bit because humor's at the top. So humor me for a second on it. Why I say avoid humor is, look, if you're not already a comedian, don't decide to become one during a media interview or a major speech or presentation. It doesn't mean you can't use humor in channels in which you're comfortable and all, but if you're talking to people who are upset and you make a joke about it, how's that going to make them feel? That you don't take what they care about seriously. Avoid jargon and acronyms. Even simple things that we use all the time, like EPA and FDA, a lot of people don't even know what the hell we're talking about. And all of a sudden it's like, what the hell are they talking to me about? With a VFD and this and that. We use this all the time. Risk numbers. There's only a 1 in a million chance that something bad could happen to you by eating conventional beef or something like that. What do people hear? Oh my God, I'm going to be the 1 in a million. So avoid that, and avoid worst case and risk speculations. Don't attack the other side when you're defending science, although I will say right now we are under attack in conventional and production agriculture from organic and natural marketing and advocacy groups that they support, and nobody is fighting that war, and we're losing it. They produce 1% of the food that they sell for 10% of our pocketbook, and they're driving 95% of policy today. We need to think about that. And then just finally for the scientists, this is how you usually tell your story. You start off with a theory, you describe your data collection, and you reach your conclusion. This is how you should be telling your story. Start off with the conclusion. This is what we found. This is what we know. Because you're going to lose 60% of the people after you get past that. So we need to, just when you're telling the story, think about it this way. So finally, I just want to leave you with 3 things. Look, the perception is reality. It's unfortunate. And we need to acknowledge it and address it. Secondly, our goal here is to gain trust and credibility. It's not necessarily to convey facts. That's the underlying, we have to have it as an underlying element. But if we can't establish that we care about what you care, we're not going to go anywhere, we're going to lose. And that communicating, whether it's to a journalist or other public groups or even online, is a skill. Skills need to be practiced, they need to be shared, they need to be developed with other people. And just with that, I'll leave you and take any questions. And I think I kept to my time limit.
You did great. Okay, as we've been doing, Terry got a question. Let's start with
is there a life cycle to these faddish beliefs? And if so, how long would that be?
There's a life cycle to campaigns. I wouldn't say once a belief is formed, it's really hard to break. If it's still an opinion, you can change it. Advocacy campaigns, they pulse. Usually they act around 3 to 5 years. Really intensive ones can go 7 years, and then they start to drop off. People will remember, we had a lot of battles around GMOs, RBST, and things like that back in the 90s and early thousands, and then it kind of went away, didn't it? I mean, those of us who dealt with the stuff didn't feel like it went away, but in terms of a major public issue, because what happens on the advocacy side is that they get donor fatigue and issues fatigue, and they can only sustain fear and concern about something for so long. That's why the current campaign that we're seeing, merging the campaign against antibiotics, against animal production, against GMOs, pesticides, into a campaign about water may be a bit of a game changer in extending the current attack on food production, I think, that we need to be watching out for. Typically 3 to 5 years. If you're not, and the more effective we are, the shorter those periods can be.
Other questions from the floor? Go right over here in the front, and we have a mic coming your way.
I know I'm getting this reputation as the question asker. Sorry. One of the things I've observed or maybe read about is the fact that, with so many changes in the traditional media, the newspapers, that a lot of the budget or the science writers or the people who are really kind of disappearing, and maybe people that folks here would have had access to before or sought out are not there anymore. They've shut down the newspapers or shut down that section. What are your thoughts about how that landscape has changed?
It's very it's a challenge on one front. What I'll say is it's interesting. Science writers can be our best friends. Science writers don't write about food often. We have cookbook authors writing about food science issues for the New York Times. It's outrageous. And the other people who write about food issues, environmental journalists. Look, I don't want to sound like I'm anti-environment or anti-organic or any of these other things, but they're not the right people. They're not skilled in it, and they've drunk the Kool-Aid. They've already formed their beliefs that everything about conventional production in agriculture is bad and wrong, most of them. So if we can invigorate science writers, get them to hold the environmental journalists accountable, to get publications like the New York Times to stop giving, their food writer status to Mark Bittman and Michael Pollan, and, versus, say, an Amy Harmon, who they do use, so I don't want to, say everything about the Times is bad, but that Michael Pollan quote that Yvette mentioned, we were the ones who actually found that in our research. It was an interview that he was giving with a guy named John Robbins, who sells a lot of crazy stuff, by the way, where he said, for years I was able to write that organic was healthier, that grass-fed was better, more sustainable, and nobody ever questioned me, and I never had to write the other side, because the editors at my paper didn't even know there was another side. So we have to be vigilant in holding them accountable. And what I would say is go to those other journalists and the other science bloggers like Yvette. And when somebody writes BS, like Bittman or something like that, turn them on them. And the pressures that can come to bear in social media have been extremely effective at getting reporters to be more efficient, be more accurate in their writings. And when that doesn't work, go to their editors. We did this with Kerry Gillum at Reuters. And we had academics constantly going back to her editor saying, here's why she's biased. And she eventually did get fired. And now she's a full-time activist with the U.S. Right to Know. So.
We'll do about one more question, maybe two if we're lucky. We got one in front, sure.
Hi, thank you for that presentation. I'm Diane Sullivan from Boston. Sort of transitioning, I'm an advocate for low-income families, and did that specifically for the past 10 years, addressing homelessness in Massachusetts. And I think we did that really effectively by bringing consumers to the table, teaching them about policy and how it impacts their lives and how they can influence policy. And I guess my question is, because I'm very new to this industry, probably the closest in the last maybe 15, 20 years that I've come to a farm is just helping my grandfather shovel some manure for his backyard garden. And I just, so my question, I guess, is, and I just want to follow up with a statement here, is how might this movement benefit from the engagement and involvement of the consumers, and particularly the low-income families who would suffer from, and have been suffering from, increased cost of food. And for those that don't know, I am party to a suit now suing in Massachusetts to stop a ballot initiative around the cage-free issue. I'll put it in air quotes and use it. Thank you. And I need you all to hear this. I got into this knowing some of what the risks are going to be. I was asked today how many death threats I've received. That made me go, what did I really get myself into? But I wanted to sort of put a quote out to you all, from Paul Shapiro at the Humane Society of the United States, who said, "The prevention of cruelty to animals is a near universal value. They have crammed animals into smaller spaces to the point now where the standard practices in the industry are out of step with the standard American values of how animals should be treated." And I want you all to just listen to my paraphrase and how important this is. The prevention of hunger in America is a near universal value. I'm just reiterating his words with my own insertions. We have families crammed into poverty to the point now where the number of children who are unable to sleep at night or focus at school in the morning because of an empty stomach is out of step with the standard American values of how human beings should be treated. So I encourage you all to really look into ways to engage, particularly the low-income communities across this country. There is an education, a self-awareness and a self-education that's going on, and I really think that there's an opportunity to partner and capitalize on this relationship.
I think it's a great idea, and because what that does is it changes the villain, the victim, and the hero dynamic. When you can present that the people promoting these organic, alternative, all natural, all of which sounds great, but we know the reality behind it is mostly BS, that they're creating victims out of these folks. We've done focus groups. We did this where we focus group consumers buying milk. And those that were motivated by that either antibiotic-free or hormone-free claim, the illegal absence claim on the side of a carton, but couldn't afford the $1 more for milk for their kids, they bought Pepsi instead. I mean, that's a sin. And so I'll leave you with a quote from Ted Nordhaus of the Breakthrough Institute, who, when he's talking about the claims that people like Michael Pollan make and Gary Hirschberg, he says, don't confuse privilege with virtue. You know, it's a privilege that you can do this and you can buy these things, good for you. But don't confuse that with virtue and that you're doing the right thing and that you're not.